Thank you very much for the opportunity to present the ReCAAP ISC 17th Governing Council meeting on developments and situation update of piracy and armed robbery against ships in the regions other than Asia. My name is Kiruja Micheni. I work with the IMO's Maritime Security Section as a project manager, Djibouti Code of Conduct. The aim of the presentation is to create more awareness on the status of piracy and armed robbery globally and to share good practices. The presentation will cover an introduction where we define piracy and armed robbery against ships, the structure of information sharing. We'll look at world statistics of piracy and armed robbery, and we'll have a case study drawing lessons from the implementation of the JEDA Amendment to Djibouti Code of Conduct. I will be assisted by more colleagues, Winnie Maina, who will present statistics, and Esther Kongo, who will share good practices from the implementation of the JEDA Amendment. Welcome. Let's first look at definition of piracy and armed robbery against ships. Article 101 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, provides the following definition of piracy. Any acts of violence or detention or any acts of depredation committed for private ends by the crew or passengers of a private ship or a private aircraft and directed, 1, on the high seas against another ship or aircraft or against persons or property on board such ship or aircraft. 2, against a ship, aircraft, persons or property in a place outside the jurisdiction of any state. 3, any act of voluntary participation in the operation of a ship or of an aircraft with the knowledge of facts making it a pirate ship or aircraft. And B, any acts of inciting or of intentionally facilitating an act described in paragraphs A and B. The threat posed by piracy and armed robbery against ships has been on the IMO's agenda since the early 1980s. In the late 1990s and the early 2000s, the focus was on the South China Sea and the Straits of Malacca and Singapore. More recently, since 2005, IMO has focused on piracy off the coast of Somalia, in the Gulf of Aden, and the wider Indian Ocean, and later involved in implementing strategies for enhancing maritime security in West and Central Africa in line with the region's maritime security agreements. The organization, with support and cooperation from the shipping industry, through the years developed and adopted a number of anti-piracy measures which have contributed towards the mitigation of the negative impact posed by piracy worldwide. Information regarding acts of piracy and armed robbery against ships is publicly available, subject to registration in the IMO's Piracy and Armed Robbery module within the organization's Global Integrated Shipping Information System, commonly referred to as GSIS. This is done in order to provide an overall view of the global threat posed by piracy and armed robbery against ships. The reports are based on data and information submitted by IMO member governments, either as flag states or coastal states, as well as appropriate regional and international organizations such as ReCAAP, or mechanisms for industry coordination such as the International Maritime Bureau Piracy Reporting Center. The varieties of information provided include basic information such as the ship name, the place, the date of the incident, and the flag state or the ship's flag. The status of the ship, for example, whether it's steaming, at anchor, or not stated. Then the location of the incident, whether in international waters, in internal waters, or port area. The consequences to the crew, was there violence, threat of violence, ship missing, or ship hijacked. The weapons used, guns, knives, grenades, or others. The number of persons involved could be 1 to 4, 5 to 10, more, or not stated. The parts of ship raided, whether the main deck, storerooms, the bridge, etc., or not stated. Then other information, for example, if lives are lost, the crew, wounded crew or missing crew, or crew held hostage, or any other such relevant information. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Winnie, to take you through the statistics. Thank you.
In pursuance of the Maritime Safety Committee's request for the Secretariat to issue reports of all incidents of piracy and armed robbery against ships reported to the organization, accompanied by an analysis on a regional basis of the situation, an indication on whether the frequency of incidents is increasing or decreasing, and advising on any new feature or pattern of significance, the presentation herein provides information on reports of piracy and armed robbery against ships received by the Secretariat since 1984, when relevant statistics being compiled, and in particular, those which occurred in the course of 2020 to 2022, as well as the regional analysis thereof. From the reports received, 1984 to 1994 had moderate incidents of piracy and armed robbery at sea. The data shows the incidents begin increasing in 1995 and with a sharp increase in the year 2000, followed by a slight decline, but then an all-time high in the year 2011, after which we now see a steady decrease in the incidents to date. It is critical to note, however, that while the rest of the region is on a decline, the Malacca Strait shows an increase as from 2015, followed by a decrease, and now an increase in the years 2021 and 2022. According to information received and made available in IMO's GC's module, 131 incidents of piracy and armed robbery against ships were reported to the organization as having occurred or been attempted in 2022. In 2021, 172 incidents were reported. This therefore constitutes a decrease of approximately 24% at the global level compared to the same period in 2021. From the data referred to above, it also emerges that the areas most affected by acts of piracy and armed robbery against ships in 2022 were the Straits of Malacca and Singapore with 72 incidents, West Africa with 21 incidents, South America Pacific with 14 incidents, followed by Indian Ocean with 9 incidents, South America Atlantic 6 incidents, South American Caribbean 4 incidents, South China Sea 4 incidents, and Arabian Sea 1 incident. The number of incidents that took place in the Gulf of Guinea, West Africa, decreased in 2022 by 17 compared to the same period in 2021, when 38 incidents were reported. This constitutes a decrease of 45%. The number of incidents of piracy and armed robbery against ships in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore increased to 72 compared to the same period in 2021 when 70 incidents were reported. This represents an increase of 3%. The number of incidents involving hostage or kidnapped crew decreased by 1 to 12 incidents in 2022 compared to the same period in 2021. The total number of crew members originally reported as hostage or kidnapped for 2022 decreased by 24 to 24 compared to the same period in 2021 when 48 crew were reported as hostage or kidnapped. The number of incidents involving hostage or kidnapped crew in West Africa decreased by 5 to 2 incidents in 2022 compared to the same period in 2021. Further details, including regional trends and developments throughout 2022, will be provided in the Secretariat's reports on acts of piracy and armed robbery against ships, Annual Report 2022, which will be released in April 2023.
Thank you, Winnie. Ladies and gentlemen, my area of focus will be the case study on the developments and lessons learned from the implementation of the Djibouti Code of Conduct and its Jeddah Amendment. The Code of Conduct concerning the repression of piracy and armed robbery against ships in the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden, commonly known as the Djibouti Code of Conduct, provides a framework for capacity building to combat the threat of piracy and armed robbery against ships in the region. It was adopted on 29 January 2009 in Djibouti and signed by 20 signatory states as shown on the map. The work outlined in the code is aimed at improving regional coordination and cooperation and is based on four broad pillars, namely information sharing, capacity building, updating legislation, regional training. The DCOC is by far the most comprehensive framework for capacity building coordination in the region and has been instrumental in repressing piracy and armed robbery in the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden. Above all, it represents the will and aspirations of the region, where signatory states agreed to cooperate to the fullest possible extent in order to deliver on its mandates. Its key achievements include developing an excellent spirit of regional cooperation through its network of national focal points, a regional information sharing network, enhanced civil-military cooperation, notable improvements in maritime domain awareness. Many of the regional states have reviewed their laws to include piracy as a crime that can be punished nationally, a dedicated DCOC multi-donor trust fund, a regional training coordination mechanism that has benefited 1,800 students thus far, an effective mechanism for capacity building coordination, and last but not the least, the DCOC has a strong governance structure consisting of a steering committee, two working groups, Working Group 1 on information sharing and Working Group 2 on capacity building coordination, and there is also a forum for coordinating efforts of donors and implementing partners, popularly known as the Friends of the DCOC. In the last 14 years, many valuable lessons have been drawn from the implementation of the code. First and foremost, you cannot achieve effective regional cooperation without effective cooperation at national level. In others, regional cooperation must be founded on strong foundations at national level. To achieve that, a national organization is critical, which in turn requires buy-in from the highest political level. The decline in piracy in the region created a window of opportunity for the region to consider implementing capacity building programs to prevent a resurgence of piracy and to address other transnational organized crimes. Furthermore, the need to address the root causes was paramount. In our key considerations, the maritime security environment in the DCOC area was changing with the reduced justification for large-scale non-regional naval support. Naturally, this placed greater responsibility on coastal states to develop regional capability. In doing so, the region took into consideration lessons learned from the implementation of the Code and the Code of Conduct concerning the repression of piracy, armed robbery against ships, and illicit maritime activity in the West and Central Africa, commonly known as the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, and outcomes from IMO Maritime Security tabletop exercises on national contingency planning conducted as part of the organization's support for the implementation of the two codes of conduct. The revised Code of Conduct concerning the repression of piracy, armed robbery against ships, and illicit maritime activity in the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden area, also known as the Jeddah Amendment to the Djibouti Code of Conduct 2017, was therefore signed in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia on 12 January 2017. Under the code, which became effective from the day it was signed, signatories declared their intention to cooperate to the fullest possible extent in the repression of transnational organized crime in the maritime domain, maritime terrorism, and other illegal activities at sea. It takes into account provisions of the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 70, Part 1, on transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the Sustainable Development Goals detailed therein, and in particular, Goal 14 and Goal 16. The scope includes human trafficking and smuggling, illegal unreported and unregulated fishing, which is IUU, trafficking in narcotics and psychotropic substances, arms trafficking, illegal trade in wildlife, crude oil theft, and illegal dumping of toxic waste in the sea. Great achievements have been made in implementing the revised code, particularly after the region established a strong governance framework for the implementation of the code. In line with the agreed terms of reference, general meetings of national focal points, the two working groups, and the Friends of the DCOC meet at least every quarter. A high-level meeting to review status and make critical decisions is held once a year. The next high-level meeting will be held in Cape Town, the Republic of South Africa, from 24th to 26th October 2023. We hope that ReCAAP will attend as a friend of the DCOC to share experiences and promote cooperation. To best achieve its objectives, signatory states have agreed on the following priorities: to build strong foundations at national level through implementation of the provisions contained in Article 3 of the Jeddah Amendment. This is supported through implementation of the IMO model on the whole-of-government approach to maritime security. Number 2, developing a robust regional information sharing network to meet the objectives of the Jeddah Amendment, enhancing maritime domain awareness to address sea blindness, capacity building coordination, and dealing with new and emerging threats to maritime security, which include cybersecurity and threat of maritime terrorism. You will note that the Jeddah Amendment contains very similar provisions to that of the Yaoundé Code of Conduct. Therefore, were Africa to seek to establish a continental-wide maritime security framework, most of its littoral states are already implementing quite similar initiatives that the African Union can build on. As we all know, many of the DCOC countries are working with limited resources, and consequently, international donor support plays a critical role in developing capability and building capacity. Here are our recommendations. Having established a strong governance framework, the DCOC is now prepared to spearhead the coordination of regional capacity building initiatives. Furthermore, projects under the code enjoy the full trust and support of regional states as there is regional ownership. I'll now invite my colleague Winnie to cover the progress made with Working Group 1 on information sharing.
Noting that the international maritime security assets are diminishing following the decline of piracy and the uncertainty regarding continued international support and mandates, coupled by the recent geopolitical events that have significantly influenced shipping patterns, which now thrives on threat analysis and vulnerabilities in the region, there is now an urgency to establish regional capabilities. With the success of the Djibouti Code of Conduct Jeddah Amendment, information sharing, and the need to address the root causes of maritime threats, including new and emerging threats, the Working Group 1 now focuses on establishment of an information sharing network that is geared towards the deterrence, detection, disruption, and prosecution of a wide list of maritime challenges. In line with this focus, the Working Group 1 has adopted the information sharing strategy, which calls for establishment of multi-agency national maritime information sharing centers with timelines to achieve initial operating capabilities slated for March 2024 for all the centers as core foundations for effective information sharing, and it has also adopted concepts of operationalization of the Djibouti Code of Conduct Information Sharing Network. The working group envisions a flow on information to, from, and within the established national maritime information sharing centers, and how the national centers will interact with the regional and international centers seamlessly, using the various means of communication and available systems to promote maritime domain awareness and increase their capabilities with a view to support maritime law enforcement operations at sea. I now welcome my colleague Esther to take us through the working group 2.
Thanks, Winnie. Now, on Working Group 2 on capacity building coordination, we recognize that coordination of capacity building efforts has always been a challenge owing to conflicting donor priorities, competition between implementing partners versus country or regional needs and priorities. To address this, in 2021 and 2022, the DCOC developed a capacity building matrix which highlights the signatory states' needs and priorities. The matrix, which is hosted in a members-only portal of the DCOC website, that is www.dcoc.org, it highlights the needs based on the thematic areas of maritime security governance, maritime domain awareness, maritime cybersecurity, the enhancement of port security, maritime law enforcement, other maritime-related needs, the DCOC Trust Fund, and the Secretariat's needs. I'll sample the Republic of South Africa in my demonstration of the matrix. Once you've logged into the DCOC matrix, you'll see that on your left, there is a menu panel for pillars, matrix map, NFPs, partners, and resources. Everything else is advised by the matrix. Now, with the pillars, we have 5 pillars from maritime security governance all the way to other maritime-related needs. All our countries are listed here, 20 of them. And on your right, we have priority levels from low, medium, or high. That usually gives the country the ability to choose which needs are immediate, which are urgent, and which one can be done at a later date. When you select South Africa, you'll see South Africa's needs show up in no particular order. But if you want to see a specific item, you can go to the pillars and select, for example, the maritime security governance. You'll see South Africa has listed that it is currently amending the legal framework to align with the National Maritime Security Strategy, its own National Maritime Security Strategy. The timeline for this amendment is slotted for the dates that are provided, 2023 to 2024, which is its financial year, and the purpose of the amendment to regulate the non-SOLAS vessels under 500 gross tonnage. You'll see on the right that the priority they have for this particular item is on high, and they are able to edit these particular items as and when the dynamics change. This is what the matrix is like. So implementing partners are able to come to this interface and see what the countries are provided as information. They will be able to help these countries based on the data they've provided. I'll hand over to Mitch to make a conclusion.
In conclusion, this presentation has covered the definition of piracy and armed robbery against ships as contained in Article 101 of UNCLOS, information regarding acts of piracy and armed robbery against ships contained in IMO's Piracy and Armed Robbery Module in GCIS, world statistics of piracy and armed robbery, and also presented a case study on the implementation of the Djibouti Code of Conduct to share lessons learned and good practices. According to information received and made available in IMO's GCIS module, 131 incidents of piracy and armed robbery against ships were reported to the organization as having occurred in 2022, which constitutes a decrease of approximately 24% at the global level compared to the same period in 2021. During lessons from the implementation of the Djibouti Code of Conduct as amended, the presentation also highlighted the importance of building capacities at national level and an effective way of developing a robust regional information sharing network. I thank you for your attention.